It's my pleasure to introduce my friend Paul Godfrey to you all. I've known Paul for well over 20 years. Paul has been, he's had a lot of jobs, and he'll speak about them, but he started as a city councillor at 25, became the overall mayor of Toronto at 34. He did that for 11 years. Moved on to the Toronto Sun, where he was the publisher. Went to the Toronto Blue Jays, where he was the president for 11 years. Got great baseball tickets from Paul. It's good to have friends. He moved on to the Lottery Gaming Corporation, and then he went into media again. He's now the executive chairman of Postmedia, which is a huge media conglomerate in the city. Paul is a Toronto boy, member of one of our synagogues a while ago, Beth Am, which became Beth David, and Paul has always been someone who has been proud to be Jewish. And when we were talking about someone who's Torontonian and a Jew, and someone who is prominent in the city, I felt that we should ask Paul to come, and he graciously accepted. So I asked Paul to come up and join us here in Paris.
Thank you very much, Stan, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor and privilege for me to be here today. And Stan, thank you for those remarks. You read them exactly the way I wrote them for you. So, I do very much appreciate that. I want to tell you, I had breakfast with a number of the people downstairs a few moments ago, and I enjoyed the opportunity of getting here early and meeting some of the people. I should tell you, I do a lot of public speaking, even though I've been out of politics for almost 3 decades now, but I gave a speech in Toronto 2 days ago. It was downtown in Toronto, and I got off to a very late start. My phone was ringing at home, and I was taking the calls, and suddenly I realized, oh my God, I'm very late. I drove downtown, and finding a parking spot in downtown Toronto is becoming more and more difficult each time. I parked my car about 3 blocks away, and I was supposed to be there at 7:30 for about a 7:40 start, and it was already 7:30, and I said, oh my God. So I parked the car, and I walk extremely fast. So I was about 3 blocks away, and I walked. I came to a traffic signal. There was a little elderly lady, I would say maybe in her mid to late 80s, standing there, and she was looking up at me, and I nodded to her, and she nodded to me, and the light turned, and I bolted across the street. And much to my surprise, she was walking as fast as I was. We came to another light, and she kept staring at me. I nodded again to her, and she said to me, "Sir, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure, go right ahead." She said, "Did anybody ever tell you you look like Paul Godfrey?" And I said, "Yes, that happens all the time." And she said, "Boy, that must piss you off." So you can see why I was glad I got here early this morning. But look, I learned a lot about your organization from being at the breakfast this morning, and I understand 90 years of having these gatherings is so important. And I noticed and was brought up to date on why you're wearing these shirts. And I think the whole world was horrified what happened in Pittsburgh. And I think it's very, very important for all of us who are Jews and considered leaders in our community to continue to stand up and answer the hate that seems to be growing in all parts of Canada and the United States at this point in time. We can never sit back and take things for granted. We must stand up for it, we must be heard, and we just demand that our political leaders take stands that are not, they don't stand behind us, they stand beside us when we speak against hate. So I commend your organization. and I hope for many years to come that you continue to meet in various cities in Canada and the United States, or even internationally, and carry on your fine work. I was asked today to say a few words, and to be quite honest with you, I would rather answer questions that you may have. I tell everybody I call myself really Mr. Average, and my wife gets a little fed up with me by using that terminology because I was never a great student in school. I'm a chemical engineer by educational background. I barely practiced chemical engineering in my life, but it seemed to be the only subject that I had any knowledge of in school. But I was not ever considered to be, in my younger years, in my teenage years, to be the guy that was ever going to be a leader in the community. So it came as a shock to people. I don't know how that really happened. I jokingly say to people, when people say to me, gee, you had such an interesting career, how did that all happen? And I was saying to a couple of gentlemen on the way up that when I was young, actually I was about 4 years old, my mother, who was a driving force in my family, sat me on her knee and she said to me, my son, if you have your choice in life between smart and lucky, make sure you take lucky every time. And you know what, I jokingly say that, but I've been blessed because either I've been in the right place at the right time. I was never a great athlete in school. In fact, disappointed my father, who was a good athlete during his years. I was far from the smartest guy, and if you took a look at my marks, at times I wonder when I was invited back to the closing of my high school about 30 years later, I said I had never been called up to give the address to the years of students who attended the school, because if they looked at my marks, they probably wouldn't even invited me to the ceremony. But somehow I graduated from chemical engineering, and somehow I was fortunate enough to have a mother who had to work because we grew up in a very poor family in a very Jewish community, and she learned how to be a professional campaign manager for politicians. And I came home one night after I graduated from school, and there was a group of people in my parents' living room, and they were talking about politics, the neighborhood, the community that they lived in. I didn't stay there. I went back to my room. I said hello to everybody. My mother came back to me and said, I'd like you to come into the room. I don't want you to say anything, I just want you to listen. And when I went in, the leader of the community group said they asked my mother to run in the municipal election. And I got so excited, I said, oh, I think that's terrific. And my mother got very angry with me, so I told you to listen. A Jewish mother, what do you expect? And I said, why? I think that's a terrific idea. She says, I'm not running, you are. I said, what do you mean I am? I said, I just graduated 5 months ago from school. And she said, I said to her, look, my employer will never give me permission to run. She says, how do you know? You haven't asked yet. So believe it or not, I asked, I was given permission, and 6 months later I became the youngest political counselor in then what was called North York, which was part of Metropolitan, which eventually was part of Metropolitan Toronto. Within 8 years, I became the chairman of Metropolitan Toronto, being in the right spot at the right time, and being lucky, probably instead of smart. The fact is, at 34 years of age, I became the leading municipal politician in the country of Canada, and sort of the super mayor of 6 municipalities that each had a mayor. And Toronto has been a great city for putting Jewish leaders at the top. Nathan Phillips, who was the first Jewish mayor of Toronto, against all odds, back in the 50s, was elected mayor. Phil Gibbons followed several years later and became the second mayor. And Mel Lastman, who's around today and a pal of mine, became the first mayor when they amalgamated the 6 municipalities that made up Toronto. They eliminated the position I had. I left politics. I started in politics in 1964. I left politics in 1984, and Toronto was amalgamated into one major city in 1997, in which Mel Lastman became the first mayor of what we called the mega city, and he became Mega City Mel. Very outspoken guy, but very, very popular, very popular. I left politics in 1984 and joined the newspaper business. I was quite surprised to be asked to become publisher of a newspaper. I should tell you that that in 1984 I knew two things about being in the newspaper business. I knew how to get my name in the paper by saying some outrageous things as a politician. And secondly, I knew how to keep it out of the newspaper when I wanted to avoid getting publicity on bad press. But the newspaper business was a fun thing at that point in time. Newspapers, you know what? You could be a dog catcher and run a newspaper and make a lot of money. Newspapers in 1984 were making more money than ever before. It was very easy. I was telling some people at the table I sat that when I joined the newspaper business and told the people that asked me, the previous paper I worked was the Toronto Sun. It's still on it's one of the papers that you could say I privately own and run today. It was very easy. In fact, when I went to my first board meeting, I produced results 10 weeks after being there. We broke every record. National advertising through the roof. Classified advertising, never been bigger. Retail advertising, had ad pages to the paper. Circulation's up, profits were up. In fact, in the middle of my comments, one of the directors stood up, and I was standing at a podium like I'm standing at this morning, and he pounded the table. And he said, I told you, and I told you, and I told you, and I told you. This newspaper is so good, even Godfrey can't screw it up. Brought me down to earth at the time. But it was a fun job. It was a great job. And just going back to the political business for a moment, I should tell you that when I became the chairman of Metropolitan Toronto, the media sort of came after me and said to me, okay, what are you going to do? You're 34 years of age. You have very little experience in life. What are you going to accomplish? Tell us what you're going to accomplish. We want to know what you have to be thinking about this. So I basically said, look, I think Toronto needs a new convention center. I think Toronto should follow the path of Montreal and bring a Major League Baseball team to Toronto. And I think Toronto should have a dome stadium so that team should play on. After I made those comments, I had to read about them the next day in the paper, and I knew my agenda was set for me. I hadn't thought a lot about it. That's true. I just blurted it out. I then decided I should try and bring a Major League Baseball team to Toronto. I started to visit, at my own expense, all the meetings. I found out where Major League Baseball was meeting. I didn't know anybody there. I went to a meeting in Florida. In Val Harbor, there was a hotel. It's been changed a couple of times, the names. I think it's the St. Regis today. It was a Sheraton before that, and it was the Americana back in the late 60s. I went into a bar, and I didn't know anybody there. They were all baseball people, because I heard them talking baseball. And I asked somebody, who's the person in charge of making sure a city like Toronto gets a team? They started to laugh at me because here I was about 27 years old at the time, and we didn't know the first thing. Finally, they told me that the commissioner of baseball was a guy named Bowie Kuhn, and he would be coming to the meeting in a few minutes. So I bought a few drinks for guys I never heard of, but I just wanted to feel like I was part of the group there. And sure enough, Mr. Commissioner came down, and I quickly ran up to him. And I didn't want to say I was from North York, which was a suburb of Toronto, so I quickly went up to him and I said to him, Mr. Kuhn, I'm a city councillor from Toronto, and I want to tell you we would like a baseball team in Toronto. And he put his hand on my shoulder, because he was about 6'7", 6'8", for those of you who remember that name, and he said to me, okay, son, where are you going to play? I said, you give us a team and we'll build you a stadium. And he said, son, let me tell you the way we work in baseball. First you build a stadium, then we decide if we want to give you a team. I was really so deflated. But when I became the chairman, as I said, in 1973, I had a commitment to make. I followed the dream of trying to get a team for the city of Toronto. In many ways, it was exciting. Believe it or not, we pulled off a deal to buy the San Francisco Giants and move them to Toronto. And I think a lot of people were shocked when I stood up at City Hall in front of dozens of cameras and said, a group from Canada, a group from Toronto, bought the San Francisco Giants and moved them to Toronto. Well, that came as a shock to a lot of people, especially to the mayor of San Francisco. The mayor of San Francisco, I don't know if anybody's here from San Francisco here. Anyone from San Francisco? I guess not, but San Francisco? Well, the mayor of San Francisco at the time was a guy named George Moscone. George Moscone called me and he said to me, Mr. Chairman, we're going to have trouble letting you steal our team. And I said, look, if I was in your position, I'd take that same position. There was a guy by the name of Harvey Milk, who was a counselor at the time, made movie Milk with Sean Penn, and told the story of the whole gay community in San Francisco. Well, the mayor was very powerful, and the mayor got a restraining order stopping the sale of the team. Imagine this, we bought the San Francisco Giants for $13 million. I gotta tell you, you can't get an average ball player for $13 million. But $13 million, we paid $7 million for the team and $6 million to buy the lease out of Candlestick Park. But the mayor got a restraining order from an elected judge, it's easy, and it stopped it. And we were devastated in Toronto. They retained the San Francisco Giants, and we ended up with a hole in the bag. A few months later, we realized that the city of Seattle had lost their baseball team, a team called the Seattle Pilots. Yeah, Seattle Pilots was sold and moved after playing 1 year to Milwaukee, owned by a guy by the name of Bud Selig. And the city of Seattle was suing Major League Baseball for violating their lease. I get a call from the owner of the Kansas City Royals that said to me, he said, Mr. Chairman, we're going to have to settle this. He said, I know you want to play in the National League, and that's why you wanted the Giants. You'd be in the same league as the Montreal Expos and have that natural rivalry of two Canadian teams. But he says, I want the league to expand, and I want to put a team in Seattle to satisfy the debt, because we're going to be sued, and we're going to lose the lawsuit, and I want Toronto to be the other team. I said, why are you so excited about Toronto? I'm very curious, Mr. Kaufman. He says, well, I married a Canadian girl from Toronto. She said to me, she says, if you don't get your damn rear end moving and get my city into the American League with Seattle, I don't think Rick's marriage is going to last. That's what he told me. Anyways, he was a very rich guy too. I don't know why I should walk away from that. Anyway, that's the way Toronto got in to the major leagues. I got most of the credit for that, even though there's a lot of people in Toronto who worked very hard. President Labatt's, the guy, the name of Don McDougall, probably deserved more credit for me, but I was the leading political person, and that's how Toronto got a baseball team. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I'd end up as president of the Blue Jay team 25 years later. I served at the Toronto Sun as a publisher and then became president and CEO. And then we were bought out. I did very well financially on that, and I was going to basically retire. If that's my wife calling, it's okay. Tell her I'm okay. I thought for sure. I get a call from the people that owned the team. They asked me to become the president of the team. And I said, what? There's a guy named Ted Rogers. He owns if you let's see what signs around the city of Rogers Communication. I said to him, Ted, I said, I've never run a sports team in my life. He said, well, let me ask you a couple of questions. Did you ever run a city before when you became chairman of Metro Toronto? I says, no, not at all. He says, did you ever run a newspaper before? I said, no, not at all. He says, so what the hell's the difference? I said, you know, you got a good point there. So for 8 years, I became the chairman of the Metro. And now go back to thinking about the point of smart and lucky. Never applied for the job, being president of the Blue Jay team. Never thought I'd be in a position to get a Blue Jay team here or a baseball team in Toronto. Never dreamt in my wildest imagination that I'd have anything to do with a newspaper. And when I was struggling in school as a student, never thought I'd even graduate. It even gets more interesting from there. I run the team for 8 years, and then I get a call from the Premier of our province of Ontario. I decide to step down. I sort of change jobs every 8 or 9 years. I stepped down as the president. Ted passed on, and I felt it was time to give somebody else a shot, somebody else that could put a winning team on. We haven't won since, but that's okay. And then I got a call from the Premier of the province of Ontario and asked me if I would come and run the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation in the province of Ontario. And I said to him what I've said to every guy that's offered me a job. I have no experience in gambling at all. You know what he said to me? Have you ever run a ball team before? So for 3 years, I ran the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, and I've come back to try and save the newspaper industry, which doesn't break any records today as far as when I was running the Toronto Sun. Some people downstairs have asked me what's the state of the future of newspapers, and let me tell you this, a little bit about that, and then I'll open the floor to questions because I find it more interesting. You may want to ask me questions. The newspaper industry worldwide is in trouble. Why is it in trouble? We have more readers today than ever before. You say, well, how come you got troubles then? Because newspapers make their money on advertising. Print advertising is where the money is, not in the readership. Although some are moving and jacking the prices of newspapers up to offset the loss of print advertising. For every dollar you lose in print, and the reason why our numbers are up, because people are reading their news on their iPads, on their computers, and on their phones. And phones are quickly taking over from everything. They're getting their news in short snippets. Every dollar you lose in print, you pick up 10 cents in digital. But it's even worse than that. You cannot compete, newspapers cannot compete with Google and Facebook today. Two ways. Google and Facebook get 80% of all advertising that used to go to print. So there's only 20% that's left. So newspapers are raising their cover price of their newspapers. There's only about 3 newspapers in North America that could really make it in the long term unless new revenue streams come in. One of them is the New York Times because it's international iconic newspaper. The second is the Washington Post, the third is the Wall Street Journal. The Financial Times in London may be the only one in the UK. So one other thing, Google and Facebook also come in and take all the content away. If you want to find information about me or any other person, you just Google their name and everything comes up. But they take all the stories and they aggregate all the stories about people. They don't pay anything for that. The world is changing a little bit because the European Union in Europe are challenging Google. And you're seeing for the first time Google, Facebook, and Apple being investigated by the Department of Justice in the United States about being a monopoly, creating more unemployment. So although newspapers are sinking, in Canada, after 6 years of knocking on the door of the government of Canada, newspapers in Canada are getting $595 million of subsidy over a 5-year period to improve the transition to the digital world and also to give us more runway to be able to compete. I have another year and a half. I turned 80 years old in January of this year, and I have a year and a half left in the contract. But it has been very interesting for me to be involved in a business where it was so easy to survive to a challenge now that it is so difficult to survive. So the challenges have been great. We've laid off, I probably laid off 4,000 people in the last 8 years. And the numbers keep going down. And people say, well, why are you doing that? I said, because your revenues have got to be a little more than your expenses. And when your revenues are falling by a great amount, and you know, the unions don't like it at times, but some of the more reasonable ones understand it. And as I said, it took 6 years to convince 2 different federal governments in Canada that this was a path, and just in the last budget, just a few months ago, we got word that there was going to be aid for that. My career has been very exciting. It's been challenging. It's been fun. I've been blessed. From a guy who's been a student, and I repeat, I call myself Mr. Average, but it has a lot to do with being in the right spot at the right time. I have one more dream for the city that I told the person that can do the most for me, that it was one of my last things on my bucket list. And being a sports jock, the only thing we're missing in Toronto right now is a National Football League team. And I have been working on that for some years. The big problem with that is that certain cities in the U.S. lose their team, and then they get a team put back in. For instance, the Baltimore Colts, those of you that are fans, moved to Indianapolis. Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore. There was another Cleveland Browns team that came in. The Houston team, moved to Tennessee. The team in Los Angeles, first of all, the team in St. Louis, which was called the Cardinals, moved to Arizona. The team from Oakland moved to LA, then they moved back. Now they're moving to Las Vegas. That's right. So the Los Angeles Rams moved to Atlanta, and then they moved to St. Louis, and then they moved back to San Diego, moved to LA again. Every one of those moves have sort of halted Toronto's thing. The interesting thing about the NFL is this. I was told when Carolina and St. Louis were supposed to go in about 15 years ago, and I remember speaking to Paul Tagliabue, who's the commissioner, because I'm a pest when it comes to chasing a sports team. I sit on their doorsteps. I chase the various owners into washrooms and stand beside them at urinals, wanting to speak to them. So I was told not to bid on it because the league agreed. We've got to go through a process, the commissioner said, but we're going to take Carolina and St. Louis in at that point in time. So I didn't bother bidding. I didn't ask Toronto to bid. We've got lots of very rich people who would love to own a team here. So what happened is that St. Louis's ownership fell apart. They took Carolina in, and guess who was the third one in line was Jacksonville. And Jacksonville, which is the 50th largest city in America, got a team. It was a third team. And it's really never done well until 2 years ago when they almost got to the Super Bowl by losing to New England. I know there's a big Boston Red Sox guy that I spoke to there. And in fact, Robert Kraft at the, who I understand has had a few problems lately, but Robert Kraft has been very helpful to try to get Toronto on our team. But the team that I think we got, there's no media here, so because I don't want this in any papers. The team that I think is the most logical team to move here is the Jacksonville Jaguars. The reason why, because it's the 50th largest market in the States, and we just had something happen in Toronto which gives me this glimmer of hope. There's a guy who owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. His name is Shahid Khan. He's a very rich guy who made his money in the auto parts business. He has 7,000 employees in southwestern Ontario, which is between here in Detroit. Shahid Khan just bought the Four Seasons Hotel, the building, the bricks and mortars, not the franchise of the hotel. And I've got to know him. So since I live by chance in the Four Seasons residence above the hotel, every morning that he comes to visit, I find a spot in the breakfast room sitting close by him. So although I've moved from visiting owners in urinals, I'm now visiting in breakfast rooms. And I hope that I can get the Jacksonville Jaguars to move to Toronto someday. So that's a quick snapshot of my life to date. And if you come back to Toronto in the next 10 years, hopefully I'll still be working at 90. And maybe I'll make some progress on that. I thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's a great honor to speak to a group that represents the international area, especially of Jewish business leaders. You're very important to flag of our people. You're very important for keeping a strong voice in your community. We have very, very prominent Jews in Toronto. And I got to tell you, it is, if you don't stand up and be counted, you'll be rolled over. And it's very important that we as Jews stand up and be counted. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have a few minutes to answer some questions on any of the topics I've spoken. There's one here and one here. We'll see how many I can take.
One second, microphones for anybody that's left.
Oh, there we go. And then there's one over here next.
We were talking about, I can speak loudly. We were talking about newspaper profitability and going forward as a business model. How are you balancing the twin concept, talking about Google simply gathering, of a paywall and saying, hey, I'm doing a product and you want to use my product, and as a secondary user or distributor, you're going to have to pay for it, versus your purpose as a newspaper of getting news and a story out to people?
Okay, well, first of all, paywalls have varying degrees of success. Most of them have been failure. The reason why, in the early 2000s, you gave the content away for nothing. They just put it up online and said, well, we got to be online. And it is so difficult to go back and start to charge people after they've got it for nothing. If you give, like, just think of yourself, if the city cleans your snow in the wintertime, and then decides, well, we can't afford it anymore, people get very upset. And if you can go on Google and Facebook and get it all for nothing, you can get aggregated news. That's why paywall. So you've got to be able to do something very much different on that. And we're working at giving a different sense. We just did a deal with a company called Logic, which has premium news. They break stories that nobody else breaks. And we're working with them to try and say, if you want a premium set of news, we're going to try that. But still, advertising, you can't charge enough on there to survive just on what we call, used to call reader sales and service. Come over here.
Okay, during your political career, did you ever have any pushback in terms of anti-Semitism, and how did you deal with it?
I had very little, to be quite honest with you, maybe because my name is Godfrey, a lot of people didn't know, although I got to tell you that I was always proud and always boasted to be a Jew. And so I used to get the odd hate mail, which I always turned over to the police, and at times even death threats, and I became a believer in what the police would say. If somebody's going to threaten you, you're not going to do it, because somebody who doesn't threaten you may very well do it, but if you're warned about it. And so I didn't pay too much attention to it, but although I saw a little bit of it, it wasn't enough to ever deter me or deter my family and cause me any concern whatsoever. One more? Last one.
How much do you think the support from the Jewish community of Toronto helped you in your career, in your political career?
I ran in an area, my first time I ran, I ran in an area that was predominantly Jewish, but the Italian community was probably, I would say the Jewish community was probably 40%, the Italian community was 30%, and it was a mixture of the rest, because Toronto is a city, it's a mosaic rather than a melting pot of many lines. Believe it or not, my first election, which I won by less than 200 votes, the Jewish community supported my opposition, who was an older Jewish guy, but I won the Italian community hands down. After that, I've had a blessed, I only ran in 2 elections. First time when I first got elected, and then when I ran in a higher position, and then when I got appointed as chairman of Metro, which is the super mayor of Toronto, it was not an elected position, but I had all the power. It was great having the power without having to the whims of the public. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Paul. It's really wonderful to have you here, and I thank you so much. It's just to have someone of your stature and as we said, a very public Jewish person in our midst. And thank you very much for your inspiring words.
My pleasure.
Thank you.